on the Wolf Trolley, and welcome to St. Augustine. Keep those hands and feet inside this trolley at all times. There's no smoking, vaping, or consumption of alcohol on the tour, and I appreciate everybody for giving those conversations and phone calls to a minimum, as this is a guided tour. Now we're entering what's known as the Lucy Abbott district of town. Right after the Civil War here in the United States, this young woman, 20 years of age, is gifted 40 acres by her family to do something with it here in St. Augustine. Her name was Lucy Abbott. She was 20 years old at the time. That's her house right there, that white house with the brown trim. That's where she lived, right there at that house. And she loved these Victorian homes, so she starts to buy them, acquire them, commission them, design them, even build a few herself. This landmark home right here, that's one of her homes there. She acquires her neighbor's house, which used to be her old Christmas store. I don't know what it's going to be next. Then she designed this Shazamore wedding facility and built the coffee house herself. So all four of those properties are Lucy Abbott homes. I don't really get along with these Firestone folks. They may be fine mechanics, but they ultimately tore down 3 of her homes in order to build that Firestone. So clearly they don't have much of a sense of history, but if you got the money, you can get yourself a Lucy Abbott home right here to the left. There's one for lease right there. You'd be living in style in St. Augustine with that thing. If it's Victorian in this area, it is likely a Lucy Abbott home. Now this one here, I'm going to own this one about 15 years, even if my birth year on it. Clearly that means it's mine, right? Now I'm ultimately telling you this story not because of my next house or because she was 20 years old, although that's pretty interesting. I'm not going to tell you the story because she had 129 properties. I'm telling you the story because she, Lucy Abbott, is in fact a she. That's right, she's a woman, and women are not allowed to own property in the north or the south at this point in the United States. She owns 129 of them. The way she gets away with it, she puts those properties in her brother's name. He's only a 12-year-old boy. The mission, Nombre de Dios, which means the name of God. This is the landing spot for Pedro Menendez de Levis back in 1565. He lands right there, commemorated by that, and then he marches his troops up to Jacksonville, about 35 miles, to go kick out the French Huguenots that were encroaching on Spanish territory. If you're exiting here, exiting on the right-hand side, going down backwards like a ladder, this is stop 20 on our tour. This is also a national for safe pregnancies, right at that shrine here at the mission. And go ahead and enjoy this place. It's right there on the bay, and hopefully you'll find some time to enjoy this. Looks just like it did back in 1565.
저는 계속해서 트롤리를 타고 다음 스탑을 이동하겠습니다.
Keeping those hands and feet inside this trolley at all times. In St. Johns County lives. This individual's been there for a while, seen everything happen here in St. Augustine, was here for the landing of Pedro Menendez in 65, was here for Ponce de Leon's landing 13, was even here when Christopher Columbus was sailing the ocean in 1492. This live oak tree, which usually lasts somewhere between 300 and 350 years, this one's double that age at least. Yeah, so we call it the greatest university of all time. You know, my University of Florida, to do a study on this old senator tree. That's what we call it. It's a live oak tree, and ultimately, to give us an age of it, they came up with the age of 650 years old. We're talking about the graduate students at the University of Florida. But their professors disagreed with them. They believe that this old senator tree that does take up a majority of this parking lot directly in front of us here is closer to 800 years old. So there's your date range, somewhere between 650 and 800. But they also found out something else.
와, 이 옥트리 한번 보십시오. 엄청 오래된 나무라고 합니다.
Another tree growing out of the middle of the trunk of that live oak, and it's not another live oak tree. It's actually a Florida sable palm tree, the Florida state tree, right in the center of the trunk of that tree, right there.
Old senator.
Now that's called a love tree. 2 trees, 1 root system. 2 trees, 1 root system. If you're exiting right inside like this one, you're going to have a long-lasting love. Now, I'm not assuming anybody's relationships. I'm just saying, if you one way or the other, ladies and gentlemen, this is also the science of a love tree. 2 trees, 1 root system. And if you were to try to sell smoking, vaping, or consumption of alcohol on the tour, I appreciate everybody for giving those conversations and phone calls to a minimum. National Geographic's magazine says that this is one of the top 10 most beautiful streets in all of the United States of America.
내셔널 지오그래픽에서 선정한 탑10 가장 아름다운 스트릿이라 그러네요. 한번 볼까요? 얼마나 아름다운지. 와, 정말 아름답네요.
Just anywhere and up, you're going to see Spanish moss everywhere. But don't let that fool you. That stuff lies to you, that Spanish moss. It lies to you all the time. It's not from Spain. It doesn't speak Spanish, and it certainly isn't even a moss. It's actually an air plant, and
여기
it's related to the
보시는 이
pineapple.
팁을 머스에
Henry
대해서
Ford, he
얘기를
loved that
해주고
stuff. He wanted to
있는데요.
put it in his automobiles as seat cushions.
특이하죠?
And
오래된 나무인 것처럼 역시
unfortunately, that stuff is loaded with insects and chiggers, and so it led to the very first automobile recall ever, and a fumigation process the world had never seen before. But here we are in the original Tamiko
Fountain of Youth.
where Ponce de Leon is located.
예, Fountain of Youth로 지금
and
지나가고
also where they have a planetarium here showing you how they navigated the stars.
그래서 사람들이 또 구경을 하고
And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, this is
이
stop
트롤리를
22 on our tour, the Fountain
하려고
of Youth.
합니다.
If you are exiting, you're exiting on the left-hand side, going down
Fountain of
backwards
Youth,
like a
본세 데
ladder. This is
레온이
stop
찾으려고
22.
했던 Fountain of
For everybody
Youth.
else, if you look to the right, you're going to see Pedro Menendez up on that pedestal there to the right. That's who the King of Spain said to. He converted the Tamiko Indians that live right here to Catholicism. He kicked out those French Huguenots, and of course, he established the St. Augustine as the colonial town that it ultimately did become. Talking about Pedro Menendez, that statue right there to the right, 1565.
Pedro Menendez.
All right, we are moving. Even though you may be ordered, it's about calling the tour. And I appreciate everybody for keeping those conversations and phone calls to a minimum. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you look right here to my left, you're going to see a peacock. There's about 111 of them that live here. There's one right there. Ladies and gentlemen, they actually are free range. They run on this neighborhood all day long, and they somehow make their way back here. Now, notice this fortification wall, very smooth on the inside. If I put my hand at the top, went straight down, I'm not going to hurt myself at all. Pedro Menendez and his men built this as to keep themselves safe as they landed here. But if I did that same action on the outside part of the wall, I am going to hurt myself, because the oyster shells that make up this wall are very, very sharp. Now, it's not about death by 1,000 cuts, but if I ultimately do try to climb that wall, I am going to cut myself at least one time, and that's all it's going to take. Because oyster shells in the sun create a bacterium that'll take you out within 24 hours.
자,
This is another
여러분들
peacock right
궁금하신
there on the
게
wall. Right
이게
there on the
또 한
wall.
마리가
There's one
있네요.
looking right at y'all.
본격세가 여러분
Alright,
궁금하신
now
게
this is a
트롤리에
quiet zone. I gotta be
손님이
quiet.
별로
I'll be back to you in
없냐면은
just a minute.
오늘이 썬데이 모닝이고요. 10시 정도 됐기 때문에 관광객들이 상대적으로 적은 것 같습니다. 이 안에 너무 시원하고요. 지금 선선한 바람까지 불고 있어서 아주 시원하게 이 트롤리를 투어할 수 있는 재미를 보고 있습니다.
At 10. If you are exiting on the left-hand side, I'm going to be exiting for a little while, and I'll be back to you in just a few minutes. With that, here we are, stop 1.
스탑 1입니다.
Did any of y'all need the free map?
We got this one. Yeah, we.
자, 여기서 잠시 스탑하고 있다가 또 출발한다 그러네요.
Like, if you want the smaller one, then I put a little
여기가 원래는 스탑 넘버 1입니다. 오리지널리. 자, 여기 잠시 내려서 뭐 여기 한번 보겠습니다. 여기 제일하우스도 있고요. 감옥. 오, 이게 제일하우스. 한번 보시죠. 야, 여기 뭐 사람 목 집어넣고 뭐 올드 제일이라 그러네요. 이런데 들어가가지고 재밌네요. 여기 일하시는 분들도 아예 제일 옷을 입고 있네요. 올제일 샌 엑스틴 플로리다. 야, 이 나무 좀 보십시오. 진짜 예술이네요, 예술. 제가 타고 온 트롤리인데요. 여기서 잠깐 내려서 구경 좀 하다가 보안관도 있고 올제일 샌 어거스틴 플로리다 1891년도에 지어진 건물이에요. 히스토리 뮤지엄은 이 트롤리 티켓을 구매한 사람들한테는 공짜라고 하네요. 여기가 기념품도 판매하는 곳 같은데요. 여기. 이곳에 오시면 샌 어거스틴 관련된 수버니어를 구매하실 수가 있습니다. 자, 여기 보시면은 Old Store Museum Experience라고 써 있죠.
Por favor, supervise a sus niños. No se permite fumar, vapear y consumir
General
bebidas
Store,
alcohólicas
General
al
Store입니다.
También
오늘날로 말하면
pedimos que las conversaciones sexuales
일반
por teléfono celular
제품들을
se
파는
mantengan al
스토어가
mínimo
되겠죠.
para que todos puedan escuchar y disfrutar la
Having a wonderful morning, beautiful day out. 22 stops. If you were to stay on board the whole time, it would take about an hour and 40 minutes. But ladies and gentlemen, my encouragement is hop on, hop off. If you see something you like to do, go do it. There'll be another trolley driver to come pick you up every 15, 20 minutes. But ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot to do right here at stop number 1. We got the oldest store museum experience. We got the old jail here where Henry Flagler moved that jail back in the Gilded Age when he didn't want to the hotels he was building. And we got our Gator Bob's train.
저기 아저씨 보세요. 죄수복을 입고 관광객들하고 얘기하는.
All times, there's no smoking, vaping, or consumption of alcohol on the tour, and they'll be keep those hands and feet inside. We'll get you on the next one, brother. You get on the next one over there. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please keep those conversations to a minimum, as this is a guided tour. If you look to the right, you're going to see the Ghosts and Gravestones trolley. That does win the Best of St. Augustine just about every single year, and they do sell out most evenings, so make sure you get your tickets in advance for that one. One more trolley car. That doesn't sound like very much some fun, sleeping in the open air around July and August here in the heat of the months of the summer. To the left, on that Fountain of Youth sign to the left is the founder of Florida, Juan Ponce de Leon. Now, he was a conquistador, a fellow conquistador with Christopher Columbus. Came over on the second voyage of Christopher Columbus in 1493, but he specifically landed here in St. Augustine on 1513 on Easter Sunday morning. Now, over there in Spain on Easter Sunday, they have a festival known as the Festival of Flowers, in Spanish known as La Florida, and that is how we got our name, which means the flower. Now, ladies and gentlemen, he didn't plan to land here. He planned to go to the islands of the Bahamas, specifically to Bimini, where the famous Fountain of Youth was supposed to be. But anyway, he marches his troops up to there. The French saw the Spanish coming, so they hopped aboard their ships, tried to do a surprise attack. Ladies and gentlemen, that's where they landed. They had to turn around, come on back north. They finally met the Spanish about 12 miles south of where we are right now, at our southernmost fortification structure for the colonial town, which was called Fort Matanzas. And that is where the battle ensued, right there in the... But those Huguenots landed here instead. They landed here in Catholic, controlled Spanish territory. They're not going to make grace here. Their bodies are going to be strewn all over the bay. The bay's going to run red with their blood for 3 days straight. And ultimately, those that survived the attack were given a choice, much like the Godfather would have given. Convert to Catholicism or die. Well, those French Huguenots were very devout in Protestant faith, so most of them chose death. Now, ultimately, they survived for a little while, so the Spanish stopped feeding them, and ultimately they died of starvation. So it just was not a good story for the French in any way whatsoever. I'll get back to that and talk about what Queen Elizabeth did in response to the situation. If you look to the right, though, you're going to see the Huguenot Cemetery, 1821, the yellow fever epidemic in St. Augustine, killing off a third of the town. All Protestants are going to be buried right there, outside those city gates there to the left. Notice the graveyard is outside the town. And 93 bodies, 93 graves, stones, but ladies and gentlemen, don't let that fool you. Every one of those graves has between 15 and 25 bodies inside. Yes, that is a very disrespectful thing to do, multiple body graves for those Protestants. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll talk about that in just a little while as well. But here to the right, you're going to see the Cuba line, the northern wall of the walled-in city, that line of palm logs right there. Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, the Queen of Spain got really tired of having to rebuild this town because we were being attacked all the time by pirates. Somebody west of us would have been swampland. If you look to the right, you're going to see the San Domingo Redoubt. This fortification structure would have been on that western wall, the Rosario line. Every one of those notches you see see there, would have had a cannon mounted on it, would have been manned 24 hours a day. All the cannons would have been facing west towards the swampland, and the enemy that would have been attacking from the west would have been none other than the Seminole Indians. All right, now we're going to fast forward past our colonial period into our industrial age with the building of this schoolhouse here to the left, the Orange Street School.
자,
First through 12th grade, all
Schoolhouse.
right here. Their
가장
teachers at the
오래된
time made a
schoolhouse.
whopping $1 a day. And that was only when they were in front of the classes. Didn't matter if they taught 3 to 4 different subjects they had to prepare for. They had to stay up all night grading term papers or writing tests. They still only made $1 a day for a total salary of $20 a month. Now, do I have any teachers on board? Past teachers, present teachers, current teachers, any teachers at all? Well, I'm sure you guys have some folks that are in your families that are teachers, and if you ask those folks how much they make, they'll tell you teachers still make about $20 a month. Gotta do something about that, ladies and gentlemen. But if you look to the right, you're gonna see the historic downtown parking structure. Nothing historic about the park that can be seen 16 miles out to sea. It even had a Broadway-style theater inside of it with a scenery loft that could fly the sets over the actors' heads. Now that place burns to the ground during the Gilded Age, so there's a bit of a conspiracy theory asking the question why that happened. Well, in the theater they were doing an opera called The Marriage of Figaro, which calls for a little fire scene. In that fire scene, it caught the curtain on fire. They call the fire department in plenty of time. They show up, plug in their hoses, turn them on again. Blip, 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 blip. No pressure to the hoses. All the hose lines have been cut. And in the hotel was staying the second richest man in the country at the time, which was Henry Flagler, and he was talking to a gal guest about turning St. Augustine into a bit of a mecca for those 1% banking families that pilgrimage their way down here to the southern colony, spend their winter months here. So the conspiracy theorists believe that the hotel owners got wind that Henry Flagler is going to get into the hotel business, and they don't want to compete with the second richest man in the country, so they're the ones that set that fire. They're the ones that ultimately did cut the hose line, so that all department, if you happen to know something about that crime, please call the cops. If you're exiting, exit on the left-hand side, going down
자,
backwards like a
여기도
ladder, this is stop
스탑인데요.
2, our Visitors Information Center, the PIC. San Marco, the one that burned to the ground.
르네상스
Now, it
호텔이라고
certainly
해요.
doesn't stand the length of a football field, doesn't have the tower or the theater that burned to the ground. But what it does have are all the same amenities those rich folks would have been expecting back then. So in that building there's a Starbucks. In the other one there's a restaurant called the Castillo Restaurant. Either have a Starbucks or a meal there at the Castillo and then wander around a little bit. Learn how gilded that Victorian age really was. It's gorgeous on the inside, pretty gorgeous on the outside as well, I'm saying. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, if you look to the right, on the street corner, you're going to see a whole line of these Florida sable palm trees, the state tree, which brings you the story of the Irish and Scottish settlers that came to St. Augustine for the first time with cattle. That's right. That means the first cowboys are, in fact, Floridian. Beat that, Texas. Anyway, they would cut down those sable palm trees, kind of boil it up, add a little garlic, a little cilantro. Hey, I don't know the recipe, but they made themselves a swamp cabbage, and that's what they ate, and that's what they fed their cattle as well. Now, the Spanish, they call those Irish and Scottish cowboys the cajitos, because you can hear the crack of their 17-foot-long whips from over a mile away. But we here in Florida, we affectionately know that same. Now, coming up on the left-hand side, as we continue on, is Potter's Wax Museum, our next stop. Over tonight in the Ghost and Gravestones tour. If you're exiting for Potter's Wax, exiting on the left to the right, going down backwards like a ladder, once again, this is top 3 on our tour. There to the right is Henry Flagler, second richest man in the country. He looks a little dazed. He looks a little confused there sitting on that bench. Something tells me he just got his concoction from old Spiciger. You know, the one with the opium inside. Is Standard Oil, known as today. Yell out your answers. I actually think I heard it, barely. I think you said ExxonMobil. If that's what you said, you are correct. In the back. To the left, you're going to see the city gates made out of coquina, which for now I'm just going to tell you is seashells. I'll tell you really what it is later on. But for now, I'll say seashells, and that's technically correct. Well, ladies and gentlemen, they wanted to tear it down 100 years after it was erected in 1908. They thought it was a bit of an eyesore with the new automobiles. But the founders for the American Revolution sat in front of a full Victorian. Hear that sound cue or not, but we're being attacked by pirates on this trolley right now. Remember, 8 times Queen Elizabeth I sent over pirates known as privateers to avenge the death of those French Huguenots. She believed it was her role to keep all Protestants safe in the New World. And And so when she couldn't do that, she vowed to take St. Augustine off the map. And she would send over pirates all the time to do her bidding. Here to the right, you're going to see the Pirate Treasure Museum. Over 650 artifacts of real pirate history right there. Everything from Johnny Depp's sword from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies to a real pirate treasure chest. Johnny Depp himself came to donate his sword right there at that Pirate Treasure Museum. And, ladies and gentlemen, that there's only 3 pirate treasure chests known in human existence. And we got one of them right here in St. Augustine. This is also a Southern colonial border experience where there's 2.5 acres showing you how they lived their life here in Spanish colonial St. Augustine. If you were actually for the Pirate Treasure Museum, and that is... We're moving. Keeping those hands and feet inside. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you look to the left, you're going to contend. It is your strongest one. It has never fallen down. We're going to stay on my trolley when I get back to South 17. I'm going to try to prove that to you, that it is the strongest sport in the country. But first, we're just going to call it the oldest one, 1672. To the left is the mouth of the bay, take you straight out to the Atlantic Ocean. To the left of that is Milano Island. To the right is Anastasia Island. It's on Anastasia, where we have our 14 beautiful miles of St. Augustine beaches. What connects us to those beaches is that Bridge of Lions, that drawbridge. We're doing a great job connecting us over there for the last 99 years. This is the historic Bayfront, stop 6, and you are exiting on the right-hand side only. Going down backwards like the ladder. These streets know that we're not. They were thinking about that bay breeze and how to push into the colonial town, creating a wind tunnel just like Chicago. Now the other reason for these long alleyways is for anyone trying to attack the colonial town, they're going to have to walk these long alleys as well. So in Spanish, they would go on the roofs and shoot down, and whether it's a pirate group or a militia group, they'd shoot down from the roofs. They were sitting ducks in these long, long alleyways. All right, now as we get up to the stop sign, ladies and gentlemen, a few things would not have been here during the Spanish period. That I want to point out. Spanish would have had no second floors. They would have had no balconies. No back door first, and then into the courtyard, into the homes prepared. 2 rooms inside those single-story homes at that time. One room would have been the hearth, the large oven. Another room would have been the living room, where the eating, the sleeping, the playing cards, everything else happened in that living room. No glass in the windows, remember. Instead, they'd have kind of a screen-like material, kind of like a cheesecloth in the windows. Ultimately, because they would use that hearth, that big oven, of pest control.
Seafood restaurant in DJ's Clam Shack Seafood.
Inside, named Johnny. Well, that's my first name, and they put a dunce cap on this kid, and I'm pretty sure they did that to me in elementary school, too. So if you happen to be going to that oldest wooden schoolhouse and see Johnny, tell him he's doing just fine, and tell those teachers, leave those kids alone. All right, if you're exiting, you're actually on the left-hand side, going down backwards like the ladder. This is stop 7 in Palatine and St. George.
Wine and tapas bar.
여기
레스토랑이 유명하대요. 콜롬비안 레스토랑인데.
Got a sister restaurant in Ybor City outside of Tampa, another in Sarasota as well. If you're going to go for lunch today, you shouldn't have too much trouble. On Sunday, they do get a little busy. Also, at night, they pack out. So if you want to go for dinner tonight, get your reservations in for sure. Now, I want to know who's on my trolley. So at the count of 3, I want you guys to yell out what city you're from. You'll feel right at home right there to the left there.
Cuban coffee.
But ladies and gentlemen, this is the Menorcan area of town right here. Those Menorcans came from the island of Menorca off the coast of Spain. They were little people, about 5 feet or less. Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, came over with a Scottish gentleman named Father Pedro Camp. Hearing that those Menorcans were dying down there of malnutrition. So he went to quote-unquote man the fort. But they didn't mean that part literally as kind of a metaphor, but it became a very real and literal situation when the English leave this town abruptly to go fight those northern colonists, aggression against those northern colonists. Now that's your answer, guys. I know you know this one. Here's a hint, 1776. Your War of Independence. All right, you guys are a quiet group. I'll stop the trivia. Y'all don't want to, that's cool. We're keep going. So, what's that? No, yeah, the Red Coast, the Independence, War of Independence, 1776. It is your Revolutionary War, of course. Now, those Menorcans that stayed up in that fort, they're the reason we can claim that St. Augustine is the oldest city in the United States. We're well older than Jamestown and Plymouth Rock, and that wasn't in your history books. What happened to us? They lied. There's a conspiracy theory right there. Big old national conspiracy. Where is St. Augustine, and why didn't you hear about us? Well, maybe you'll find some of those answers on this
Molly
trolley.
Wiley
Now, ladies and
art
gentlemen,
building이라고
Henry
써있네요.
Flaherty's back of his first hotel here to the left, which is the Ponce de Leon Hotel now. It is built by Tommy from Philly. Tommy was also responsible for putting water and electricity in one of those rooms, ultimately. And this is 4 years before the White House had water and electricity in those rooms. We've had several presidents stay here, though. Grover Cleveland, Lyndon B. Johnson, FDR, even Lady Bird stayed here with LBJ. But ladies and gentlemen, this Tommy fellow I'm telling you about is none other than American inventor / discoverer of electricity, Thomas Edison, of course. He had a lot of negative propaganda following around the country. People were fearful. They thought they were going to get electrocuted from his electricity. So Henry Flaherty has to solve that problem as well. And he does it with a group of folks he hires called the Switch. Back in the evening, turn them all off again. They really loved their job. They called it electrifying. All right, now, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at Flagler Memorial Presbyterian Church. If you'd like to go and go with their worship service this morning, feel free to get off right now. They're not going to do tours until later this afternoon, but this is one of the most beautiful churches in all of the United States. It is ultimately rival 11 o'clock service as well, right there to the right. And like I said, all are welcome, and feel free to go to their tour later on. I think they usually start. He had a daughter named Jenny Louise who was pregnant over there in England. Trying to get to the New World, she got to treat you right as well. Now across the street, you're going to see the 123 burger. That's my favorite burger joint in town. They got the best black and blue burger here in St. Augustine. Best one I've ever had, actually. And also, ladies and gentlemen, 12 different styles of